Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Insights and Innovation series for this short week in April. We're in April still, yes. So today we have our great partners at Bliss coming to join us today, and they're going to talk to us about have we lost the audience. So there's been, and there is a tremendous amount of change on our way in terms of changes with data privacy, changes of iOS, in changes of Google cookie apocalypse, and what does this all mean for us? Is the audience going? How do we measure it? So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our two legends, Elias and Harry, who are going to talk us through these changes. I'll shut my mouth and hand over to you guys.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sam. Very nice to meet you all. As you know, we're massive supporters of the IMAA, so thank you very much for giving us your time today. I'm Elias. I'm head of sales across ANZ. I'm going to introduce to you Harry Lamb, who's our head of insights across APAC, and Ed Burley, who's our head of marketing across APAC as well. So my role today is quite minimal. I'll hand it over to the expert, Harry, who says it's all based on our insights and research, as Sam mentioned, going into the new way of how we're going to reach audiences. So thanks, guys. Over to you, Harry.
Awesome. Thanks, Elias. Quite the intro there. I think it's our second presentation at the IMAA, so it's really awesome to be here. Certainly my first presentation. Might even be the last one, depending on how this goes. But before we crack on, this is our team. We're a small but happy bunch, and we certainly punch above our weight. So as Elias mentioned, he's the head of sales. I think EJ might be on the call as well, Imogen Owens. She's our fearless leader and industry legend, of course. Speaking of legends, we also got Ed, who's not in shot, but he's definitely here. If not physically, then absolutely in spirit. And that's me with that dodgy haircut as well. I can't believe I let that through and let that slip. So we're at the heart of what we do is location advertising. We've been around for about 17 years. And what we do really, really well is help clients and advertisers uncover and reach audiences using the lens of location behavior. As mentioned before, we're quite a small team, and but we do punch well above our weight, and we are proud. We are bloody proud to be an indie. And I think that's something to absolutely shout to the rooftops about. I think Sam and the IMAA have done an incredible job in putting a spotlight on some of the great work that we've all been doing and the contribution that we make in the industry as a whole. There's a reason why advertisers reach out to an indie, right? They want ideas that are outside the box, outside the norm, outside of convention. When they reach out to us, all of us, what they're after is innovation, right? It's certainly true in marketing. It's absolutely true in art and music as well. So these cheerful lads at Joy Division, they're probably the most indie band of all time. They were certainly signed to the most indie label of all time, Factory Records, which was coincidentally just one guy. So indie, in fact, that they didn't even have contracts, right? So imagine doing business that way. But these four lads, they use the same equipment as everybody else. They use the same tools, same instruments, but because they were unencumbered by convention or rules or mainstream ideas, they were able and free to innovate. And the art that they created was singularly incredible, right? But not only incredible, they were incredibly influential as well. So they became New Order and influenced a whole heap of electronic music, which influenced dance music, which influenced hip hop eventually. And then whatever it is that your interns and execs listen to these days. So, you know, again, I think it can't be overstated, just the level of influence that we as individuals and as a collective that we can impart upon the industry as a whole. And the reason for that, just by the way, if you stick around to the end of this presentation, I've got my top 5 Joy Division songs that every marketer should include on their next family road trip as well. But the whole reason for all this is obviously, you know, in terms of influence and innovation, is that everybody on this call, in their own way, are innovators when it comes to reaching audiences and reaching people. And we have to be, by definition, right? We don't have at our disposal the ability to allocate 40 people onto a particular client. We don't have the ability or $100 million to dedicate to a particular product. We have to use our innovation and nous and our skills in order to innovate and make that and reach audiences. But the question is that about to get a whole lot harder? So I'm quite shameless when it comes to my visual gags, obviously. But if you were around last week, you may have heard these guys stomping around the room. And the noise that they were making was certainly reverberating around the industry in any case, right? And the question that they raised is rather quite confronting, right? And the idea is, obviously, with the impending privacy changes and all the things that are happening in that particular space, the question is, are we actually losing the audience? And if so, what should we be doing about it? But before we take a look forward, it's good to kind of reflect on where we've come from. So obviously back in the day, when it came to reaching audiences, things used to be really quite simple, obviously. So back when Elias was a kid, you know, when it came to reaching audiences, age, gender, there wasn't really a whole lot when it came to understanding and reaching audiences, but it absolutely was effective, obviously, right? But obviously these days, we take it for granted, don't we, right? So the whole ecosystem in which we play in, from research all the way through to programmatic, is designed to understand and reach audiences. So suddenly, you know, we can understand audiences from quite an extensive and comprehensive way. And we're going to return to this fella in just a second. But here's Nelly the elephant, obviously. So changes are coming thick and fast. And it was kickstarted in earnest last year, I suppose, when Apple got the ball rolling with all their changes stemming from iOS 14.5. So the inevitable impact that that's had on IDFAs. Google's having a crack as well with the very slow death of the cookie and the things that they're implementing as well. And as the awesome Gayla Roy presented earlier last week, there's bound to be privacy regulation and legislative changes that are coming, likely within the next 18 months, and they're probably going to hit harder than we first anticipated. So obviously, morally, you know, privacy is absolutely something that is a correct thing to pursue, right? But the question then becomes, well, if the momentum is being driven by a select few, maybe into walled gardens, is this necessarily the best thing for the consumer? Is this necessarily the best thing for advertisers? And obviously, everyone in the room can probably question the altruistic reasons behind some of the things that are happening. But is the role for the indie to innovate and to reach audiences about to be impacted? So that's the existential question that I think that we're all facing, right? So if the trajectory is that we're heading into is approaching, is our ability as independent vendors, independent publishers, about to be diminished in terms of our ability to understand and reach audiences? But obviously, the asteroid is now within our atmosphere. What do we do about it, right? If all the solutions that we generally use is about to be confined to a select few, where is the role for the indie to innovate? Where is the role for the indie to provide value and differentiate? So what we're not suggesting, I can't speak for Sam and the IMAA, but what we're not suggesting, obviously, is that somebody straps themselves onto a rocket, slingshots their way around the moon, land on the privacy asteroid, and then blow themselves up on there. Although that sounds rather interesting and maybe potentially quite fun. But that innovation, that nous, that creativity that I spoke of, that's so innate within indies, that is probably needed more than ever during this particular time. Bliss is a location advertising business, and we sit right on the event horizon when it comes to the privacy issue. So even before this whole issue started gaining traction within the industry, we were forced to think about the impact that it would have had on our business. And so we've been implementing changes over the past 2 years in anticipation to what will eventually occur. And it's actually made us better, right? So the steps that we've taken has actually made us better at reaching and understanding audiences, all while being less reliant on personal identifiers. And while we're not going to give, obviously, hard answers to some of the really, really big, meaty questions, they're still being solved by boffins much smarter than myself. What we can provide is a view on, I suppose, some of the guiding principles that have helped us during this particular time. And our North Star, our guiding principle, has been to bring it back to audiences. And when you bring it back to audiences, suddenly a lot of those new challenges, not only do they look really familiar, but they're also challenges that we as marketers, everyone in this room, are used to solving every single day. And some of the questions, obviously, this is a rather simplified list, but they range from things like learning and understanding audiences using data, all the way through to reaching and engaging audiences, this obsession with a unified solution, and finally the meaty one, right? How do we prepare for changes when it comes to privacy? So let's unpack some of these questions. So that big meaty question, right? How do we still uncover and learn about audience and privacy first? Well, that's really an updated question that we actually answer every day as marketers, right? So which data points gets us closest to our target audience? Everyone in this room are experts in terms of piecing together different data points in order to answer the key questions for our clients. And that is a question I think that we should always be asking. What is your data point actually telling you? Do you actually know what's under the hood? So I thought it might be fun to kind of take a look into what the internet thinks I am. So a very common way of understanding audiences based on my internet and browsing behavior. Really quite scary, no gremlins here, but I thought it might be fun to kind of piece this together. So based on my internet habits, according to what I browse on the internet, it seems like I fall into most ages, everything from 18 to 20, all the way through to 65, 70 plus. What this also tells me is that I have about 30 years to grow a beard as well with my Asian gene. So it's well on its way. Apparently I have kids as well. Now, no one's chased me up for child support, but apparently based on my browsing behavior, there we are. I won't tell my partner if you won't. I am in the market for a car, but every single type of car. I'm into cosmetics as well, really, really into cosmetics, but no comment there. Every type of movie, some classics there, and it goes on and on and on. So much so that when you actually take a step back, there's so much of what's in there that is completely unrecognizable. Now, we're not here to kind of denigrate or diminish what this is as a data source. If you're after somebody who's possibly read some alpaca content, I might be your guy. But if you're after an alpaca farmer, this is probably where it might fall short. Very soon, a lot of this will be probably inaccessible, but I think for the time being, I think we can still take a look at this. So have a go, just type in Oracle Registry yourself, and it might be interesting to see what actually pops out based on your internet browsing habits. But what that brings us back to is a question that I think we all know very well on this call, and that is the fact that addressability or insights is very much dependent on the quality of the data point. In fact, I'll go one step further and say that, when it comes to understanding audiences, it's how much you know about that particular data point and what story it's telling you. In terms of what we found really, really helped us in this particular journey is to always incorporate a bit of deterministic data into our overall mix. We find that removes a great deal of ambiguity when it comes to understanding audiences, right? So if you're after somebody who is a bit of a fitness fanatic, it'd be great if you had some first-party data that says, hey, this person buys protein powder once a week or once a month, right? The way that we do it at Bliss is to use location data that says this person visits a gym 3 times a week, right? Or for a foodie, it might be people who visit a restaurant, once a week or twice a week. That using actual behavior gets you really, really close and grounds you when it comes from a data perspective. Now, the next question here, obviously, is that as the privacy changes are about to really take hold, our ability to rely on this as a sole data point becomes diminished. And we've been thinking about that, right? So moving forward, what we've been doing is that we still believe in this particular data point as an integral part of the way that we understand audiences, but it's only one part, right? So have in your overall mix some deterministic data, because that gets you really, really close to the consumer at heart. So we've talked about insight. Then we move on to reaching audiences. So this pickle that we have about how do we actually still reach audiences during that time? To me, it's just a flip side of a question that we, again, are quite used to answering from a marketing perspective. And that's the idea about bridging the gap between insight and action. And it's the eternal question when it comes to marketing, right? So obviously we have at our disposal a whole ecosystem that's designed to create and understand very rich and in-depth audiences, very, very sophisticated ways of understanding who people actually are. But the question is, what can you do with it, right? So going back to that millennial value-conscious early tech adopter, there's a lot to unpack here, right? So we're talking about how we would potentially build this audience. I suppose there's a behavioral layer. We could include people who have been demonstrated to spend big on tech and spend frequently on tech, or people who regularly visit tech retailers or locations. Then there's the whole, qualitative stuff, right? So attitudes towards price, attitudes towards tech, and bargains, and the tried and tested demographics as well. So we've been thinking about how we can actually kind of piece this stuff together. And on the surface, it looks really, really complicated, right? There's a lot going on here. So thinking from a Bliss perspective, from a location behavior perspective, it could be people who we found in tech locations or retailers. It could be people through our partnership with MasterCard. We've got spend data. We work with Roy Morgan, that gives us a whole heap of qualitative data. And then we've got some demographic stuff that we can weave together. But increasingly, what we found is that need to piece all this data together has become really, really important, especially in this current privacy age, where that link between insight and action has become really, really, really important. So traditionally, we've played in the location space, and that used to be all that we did. But over the past 2 years, we've tried to kind of piece these things together, right? So when it comes to Roy Morgan, we introduced that about 2 years ago, when we recognized that there was a qualitative gap in terms of what we understood about our audiences. But then finally, over the past year, our response to the privacy changes that have been happening is to literally piece them all together using machine learning. So right at the very, very beginning, I mentioned that, always to have a piece of deterministic data in there. And the way that we build audiences, and what we've found really, really helps, is to start off with that location seed, or starting with that behavior. So what you're looking at here is basically audiences that over-index strongly, or actually literally audiences that have been to tech and computing locations. And then from there, what I've done is I've introduced a whole heap of qualitative measures and also age and demographics as well. And this is to add that qualitative and that demographic layer, all using machine learning. I'll add one final thing here as well, and then I'll just include some spend profiles in there where we can start to kind of get even deeper when it comes to this particular audience. Where is retail? Consumer electronics there. So what pops out is an audience that starts off with that deterministic layer. That's really, really important. And then using machine learning, we then layer on everything else that we know from a qualitative perspective, from a demographic perspective, from a spend perspective. And then that final link is to be able to then activate this audience straight away. And that's what we found to be really, really helpful for us, right? So firstly, that age-old marketing problem, understanding the traits that will truly make a difference when it comes to understanding the audience. That's something that everybody in the call is really good at, right? But then what we found really, really helped was to also include solutions in our mix that directly translate that insight about our audience directly into some sort of action. So finally, this obsession with a unified solution, it absolutely makes sense. And we probably wouldn't be able to do it justice in 2 or 3 slides. And spoiler alert, I don't have all the answers. But a different way of thinking about this particular problem is, I suppose, a question that we answer every day, again, as indie marketers, right? And that's the idea of what is the optimal mix when it comes to reaching audiences in the best way. So it seems like the industry trend is moving towards solutions provided by 1, 2, or 3 of the major players in the market, right? And on the surface, it seems like a one-size-fits-all solution is really, really awesome. It'd be really, really awesome to know that a person that you've seen on a mobile is also watching TV, that's also doing this other thing, right? But in terms of the outcomes, are we necessarily choosing these options or moving towards these options because it provides the best solutions for consumers and advertisers, or maybe because it's easy? While we're obsessing over this unified solution, the literature, the research is really quite conclusive when it comes to the effectiveness of media, right? So I pilfered this again last week. We really did pay attention to Operation Bounce Back, but this is well known, right? So this is out of home basically, but we all know that media in isolation is nowhere near as effective as when applied intelligently with other forms of media. It just works, right? So whether it's out of home with digital to TV, or TV digital, and mobile, when combined together intelligently, the end result is way better than when it's isolated as well. So what we found really, really helped us is to choose solutions that complement and enhance one another. Say, for instance, if you bought maths, you probably know that on the next day, people are probably going to go to work, right? So buying out of home probably makes sense, and that will make your TV buy a great deal better. At Bliss, we're an indie publisher. We know that we're probably never going to be first on the plan. We're probably going to be sitting alongside a great deal of other vendors as well. So one of the things that we thought about was, how do we actually enhance some of the stuff that that also sits in the media plan and makes that better and makes the overall impact better. So going back to Audience Explorer, what we've done here is that from this particular Technophiles audience, we can do something as simple as helping clients understand which areas are more likely to catch the light rail, right? And armed with this information, you could potentially make your out of home a bit more effective from a targeting perspective. Or it could be, which billboards or which corridors would you choose when it comes to reaching people who are driving into work, right? So when combined together, media is much more effective, right? So, when it comes to making out of home better, choosing the best spots and the best locations, that absolutely does that, right? Or whether it's retargeting people on their commute or when they're at home, the combined effect is that the overall impact of the campaign is, exponentially better, and we all know this. And then finally, when it comes to changes or preparing for the changes in privacy, and I think that what this really, really comes down to, firstly, is that age-old marketing challenge of, ensuring that one's approach is always relevant, but also putting the consumer at the heart of one's marketing strategy. So one of the first things is to get started, right? So when it comes to working with your partners and with your vendors and with your publishers, challenge them. Challenge them to define what their vision is for what's coming up, right? So what is their approach? What is their roadmap for what's happening? And how can you work together to ensure that you guys are ready? Because challenges will come, and they'll come thick and fast. The way that we've approached it was to select publishers and vendors and partners that have privacy first in terms of everything they do. And then everything else becomes a whole lot more aligned. And then finally, and this is probably a really neat slide to kind of end on, will be to reflect on what the whole point of this privacy thing actually means, right? And that is the right for the consumer to consent. I think we can all agree, from a human perspective, from a marketing perspective, that it's absolutely right that the consumer has a choice in how and when brands can engage them. And increasingly that choice will be more and more substantial and more expanded. And what that means is that when we do have their attention, that time becomes a great deal more precious, right? And the onus is on us to provide more value than ever. And that again is something that I think everyone on the call is really, really good at. So when we do have their time, I think it's on us to be better when it comes to giving them memorable experiences that delight or inspire, or at the very least are useful, right? Getting better at these things ensures that we don't waste the time that they give us, right? Because that time is increasingly precious. So finally, when it comes to the penultimate question, have we lost the audience? Well, not if we have something to do about it, right? So all the requisite skills and knowledge that we have that we use in our day-to-day jobs, we can absolutely apply to navigate us through this particular period. So whether it's understanding the data points that you're using, bridging that gap between insight and action, all the way through to stuff that we always do, right? And are really good at delighting, engaging, and being useful to the consumers who are exposed to what we do, right? So it's well within our grasp and well within our capability to not only navigate through these times, but also to thrive as well. So that's the end of the presentation proper, and as promised, I thought it might be fun to kind of give you my top 4 or 5 Joy Division tracks to add to your next family road trip playlist. And these are actual song titles as well. So starting off with Transmission, right? So these are actual song titles. This is my favorite, being an insights analyst, Inside. For your cynics out there, A Means to an End, probably one for your ops team. And finally, Digital, right? So actually a bloody great song as well. And one final bonus track, I Remember Nothing. And thank you for listening.